Okay, thank you very much, Angela. Thank you, colleagues, for the invitation to join this afternoon or to moderate this session. It's an interesting topic that's very core to our work here, and I'm glad to be here alongside some great speakers to, I guess, close out the forum. So that's a bit of a responsibility for us here on the hydrogen topic, but we know it's of great interest to everyone. So we're glad to be here. I hope it's been a useful and interesting couple of days for you all. So as Angela mentioned, I'm team lead for renewable gases here at IRENA in the Innovation Technology Centre. And in our language, renewable gases really means hydrogen and its derivatives. And our team sits underneath the Innovation and End Use unit. So we have two main focus areas in terms of our hydrogen work. It is a topic that's increasingly coming up in everyone's work, but from our point of view, we're looking at the role for hydrogen and the derivatives in the decarbonisation of hard-to-abate sectors, in particular industry, chemicals, and the heavy-duty transport sectors. So we're trying to think about the measures that are required to support the adoption of these alternative fuels in those sectors. We're also then thinking about what that means for an international energy transition. So in the context of the emergence of global market, potentially and theoretically, and indeed in a situation in which there's a lot of ambition in that area. I think we'll explore some of those topics here in the session. So just to set the scene a little before we get started and hand over to the speakers, I thought I would start with essentially an IRENA view on the role or the use of scenarios and understanding the position for hydrogen and the derivatives in the transition. So I understand you've all been talking about scenarios and modelling and the use of those to inform policy and planning. So I thought it would be helpful if I came along and provided a little bit of a view of our own on that subject. So I've got two slides and then I'll hand over to the speakers and then we'll move into a panel discussion and we'll have opportunities for questions and interventions from the audience. So firstly, looking at our World Energy Transition Outlook, which I'm sure you've seen excerpts from variously throughout the week. We have in the 2023 World Energy Transition Outlook a view of the means of addressing total final energy demand in a 1.5 degree C compliant scenario that involve various shares of different energy carriers. And as will hopefully not be news to anyone in the room or online, as the International Renewable Energy Day, we see a really strong role for electricity here, particularly renewably powered electricity, of course. And we think that the vast majority of end-use applications can and should be electrified. But we recognise that there are a number of applications and sectors where that's not the case. So we refer back to those hard-to-abate sectors that I mentioned earlier. And in that context, we're imagining or envisaging around 14% of total final energy demand being met by hydrogen or the e-fuels, the derivatives. And that's across those sectors in industry and in heavy-duty transport. So it'll be interesting to see if that kind of number figures in the presentations that we see from the colleagues who are joining us shortly. We'll see. Then what that means in practice, if we think about that at a global level, we're looking at a very significant challenge in scaling up the renewable capacity and electrolytic capacity that would be required to produce a sufficient volume of hydrogen to address that demand, and indeed also on the conversion side to think about how you then convert that hydrogen into ammonia, methanol, e-kerosene to then address those sectors. So in our 1.5 degree C scenario, again, within the World Energy Transition Outlook, we're looking at potentially up to 5,700 gigawatts of electrolytic capacity by 2050, which is a really significant challenge relative to where we are today. And we should be really clear about what that means from a policy and a planning perspective, the challenge ahead and the volume of investment required and the level of coordination that's needed. So I think that's a good call to action for why discussions like this one are incredibly important and why we need all the various stakeholders that are represented here in the room and online to be taking part in this discussion. And I just wanted to essentially lay down a bit of a challenge to our speakers and to all of you when you're coming out with questions. So I'm about to hand over to the speakers to come and show their initial presentations to set the scene from their perspectives, and then, as I say, we'll move into the panel discussion. So I will just let you know exactly who you're expecting. So hopefully you have an agenda in front of you, but in case you don't, we have Francisco Dominic Guzman. Apologies in advance for the pronunciations, colleagues, who's joining us from the Ministry of Energy in Chile, and will be showing us some of their national perspectives on hydrogen derivatives. We'll then have Jessica Arias Gaviria from the Mining and Energy Planning Unit in Colombia, and then we'll have Florian Knobloch from the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action here in Germany joining us. So we're going to go through each one in order. They each have 7 minutes. I'm going to try to keep them to their 7 minutes, but we have a little bit of flexibility if needed, as we've got a lot of good material to get through. So, Francisco, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For those who still haven't heard from me on these 3 days, I'm Francisco. I work at the Ministry of Energy in Chile. I'm a senior analyst in energy planning. So I'll try to be brief. They gave me 7 minutes. So if I go in very fast, you say, okay, Schumacher, please stop. In general context, Chile is in South America. It's a country with limited fossil fuel reserves. But it has significant renewable energy resources like hydro, solar, wind, and geothermal, and another. On the north side, we have a lot of sun available. On the center, there's a lot of sun too, but everyone, as we talked on Monday, everyone prefers to go to the north because the demand is in the center. So we have a little transmission problem. And on the far south, we have a lot of wind potential. Please consider that the main power grid goes about 2/3 from the south to the north. So the far south doesn't have a power grid by itself. It has a lot of small grids by, I don't know, little towns, something like that. It's mainly private energy market. It's a sector liberalized since 1982. So it's separated, it has by law to be different companies in generation, transmission, and distribution. And we have a national enterprise called ENAP that works with the hydrocarbon sector. I left that slide purposely in Spanish, just to know you. Because what I wanted to say with that slide is that on the last 2 or 3 years, we made a lot of plans. We kind of overplanned everything. We have a mitigation plan. We have a hydrogen plan, which is the main topic here. We have a decarbonization plan. We have a strategic, everything. We made a lot of plans. But as the right part says, some plans are made for strategic purposes. But when we go to hydrogen plan and decarbonization plan, it's more like a tactic scope. So we on this plan we say who must do what, and that's very important for us. That next slide. So we're going to talk about the hydrogen plan specifically. Its main objective is to define a roadmap between this decade and that can allow deployment of sustainable industry in hydrogen, and it has specific objectives like incorporate dimensions of sustainability in the action plan, or the actions of the state agencies which has an impact on this green hydrogen industry, and identify new sections necessary for the deployment, prioritize actions, and define roles. Oh, one thing I left, I'm going back. Chile is in the far south of America, as you know, and we have a lot of wind potential on the far south. Some people said, oh, that cannot be connected to the main grid, but we have a lot of potential. Can we do that? Can we do something about that? And we say, oh, we can produce hydrogen. Are we near some consumption places? Oh, well, we can take boats to Asia. We can take boats to America from both sides, and we can take boats to Europe Yeah, and say, okay, but it's a loss. It's a distance to cover, right? But we just say, yeah, but we have a very good factor of wind on the far south. So if we can compensate the distance with a very high factor, we can produce hydrogen on a competitive way versus other markets. That's an important fact. Sorry. Um, so on a hydrogen plant, we made a very long participatory process. We had an advisory board, a strategic committee. We had interministerial roundtables. We had a lot of public consultation and citizen workshops. So the community can be involved on this plan, as we talked on the early days. So people see themselves, their ideas are reflected on the plan. So we all work together on that. There's little pictures of that roundtables and citizenship participation, for example. So the measures of the action plans, there are 111 measurements, some of the government, some for the market enablement and promotion, enabling infrastructure, participation, permits are very important on our country, industry sustainability, among others. So these actions, these 111 actions are separated between two periods we find very significant. The first part is investment signal standards, ammonia as a recognized ammonia as a fuel, and off-takers. So we moved the market on these 3 years according to the plan. And then the second part is production linkage and decarbonization. We have, as the yellow part says, permitting system, taxes, public environmental baselines, shared infrastructure, regulation, among others. So that's another view for what I just said. So I will pass very fast. So time. International positioning is very important on our plan because, as I said before, we have a distance to cover. So we have to make international positioning very important. It's for us. We have 33 FTA commercial agreements. We have joint declarations, 7 MOU and 2 MOC with different countries around the world. So we can start selling hydrogen when it is a very good industry. We have some goals too for 2030. Materialize the first green commercial maritime route in Latin America. So we have those plans for make green routes, we call that. So the ships with hydrogen, it's going to be I don't know, more important than other routes. We have some projects working. There are small scale projects, I have to say, but we're working, testing the technology, testing the electrolyzing process, and producing green hydrogen. We have some in the north with sun, some in the center that some industries like Walmart. It's a very big warehouse, has solar panels on the roof, and they produce green hydrogen and they consume on their forklifters on the same warehouse. And some projects on the far south too. And just closing, about 6 weeks ago, maybe a month, we have that very interesting news that there was a company, a Danish Austrian consortium called H&H. You can search it on Google. And they applied for environmental permit and $11 billion green hydrogen and ammonia complex on the far south. Just as I said before, and that's the largest ever investment that is applied for environmental permit. So I think it's going on the right path. Thank you very much. And if you want to download the hydrogen plan, it's in English too. You can download it at the webpage. Thank you very much. 8 minutes. 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, Francisco. I was very impressed with the pace you managed there. So now we're moving on to Jessica, please.
Okay, I try to do it in 6 minutes. 5 minutes. All right, so I try to be brief. I'm not going to talk to you about, I'm not going to try to sell Colombian hydrogen. I think you will inform, you, I will tell you what are the challenges that we have instead. For integrating into the scenarios and how is looking right now the planning of hydrogen in Colombia. A little bit of history, recent history, is that we also have a lot of plans and also very inspired by Chile. We developed a hydrogen roadmap in 2021. And we include hydrogen in the law for renewable energy incentives. That was in 2022. And this roadmap has some goals for production and from demand. For green hydrogen, we expect to have from 1 to 3 gigawatts of electrolyzers by 2030. We have some targets of what is the cost of the hydrogen that we want to reach. And from the demand side, that roadmap was expecting to have some national consumption in some sectors, such as transport and industry. But right now, we are reevaluating this because what we have seen, the pilots that have been developed in other countries. Colombia has some pilots also in transport, in blending, but all these results are just taking us to reevaluate if these demand targets are feasible or if we should be thinking about the use of hydrogen more strategically only for hard to abate sectors, which makes more sense. And yeah, that's in the recent years. What happens last year and this year is that we evaluated how it's going to be the perspective of hydrogen in our scenarios. And what we find out is that for a just energy transition and for reaching the targets of decarbonization of Colombia and being aligned with the net zero, we need around 90 gigawatts of renewables installed by 2050 only to supply other uses of electricity. So the first challenge is that we cannot leave the demand of electricity for hydrogen, like evaluating aside of the long-term scenarios. It should be integrated in our own models. So we include this, and we find out that for the perspectives of using hydrogen for hard-to-abate sectors, industry, heavy transport, and Power-to-X, then we only for the Colombian demand of hydrogen is expected, we will need around 10, 12 gigawatts additionally to this 90. And if we include some, I have to say, conservative projections of exports of hydrogen, then that will go to more than 100, 108, I think it says. And some, depending on some scenarios, we can get 120 gigawatts of renewables. And I say that this is conservative because in some recent studies this year, we are now talking about needing more than 50 gigawatts only for hydrogen. And this is a conversation that brings a lot of concerns in the country because I will tell you some secret. 1 year ago, when we talk about 100 gigawatts, all the energy sector just point at us and say that we were crazy if we were trying to put all that capacity in Colombia. And now when, all the people that have some expectations of having hydrogen for exports are now on our side because they say, that's not going to be enough. If you want to export hydrogen, you're going to need much, much more. And then we have a lot of concerns about just energy transition because the area that is expected to have the lower cost of hydrogen in Colombia is in the Caribbean coast in La Guajira, which is where we have all the wind potential, and it is where right now we have so many social and environmental conflicts with transmission grids and with the communities not feeling included in energy planning, not feeling that they can have any benefit out of it. So we have a lot of work to do there to integrate them into not only into renewables for other uses, but if we expect to export hydrogen, then we need to include them in the conversation as well, because they already suffered many years of negative impacts from coal industry that have left them nothing or very few benefits to these communities. And now they see hydrogen as exactly the same but a different name. And it's using our territory to produce some energy product to export, and then what's left for us. So we need to be aware of this, and now we're working on including these communities into the conversations, because once they understand the importance of transition, the benefits, most of the time they are very willing to cooperate. They just feel like they don't want to get anything like being in position from the national government, from other governments that want Colombia to export hydrogen. They want to be part of it and plan it together. So that's where our biggest challenge is, I think. And now, then again, reevaluating our targets. We are mapping all the projects. We have a platform where Colombia is trying to have like a interactive map where every project every company or developer that wants to develop a hydrogen project must register there. So we can see where all these projects are intending to be. And also each community can get access to the map and see how many projects are planning to be developed in their own territories, so they can have more transparency in this planning process. Yeah, we have an English link too, so if you want to take a look at that. And I think that's it. Yeah, less than 7, I did it.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Indeed, right on time. Very interesting. So last but not least, we're moving on to Florian, please.
Hi, everyone. So thanks for letting me speak here on behalf of the German government. I'm with the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and the ministry actually covers the portfolios of economics, energy, and climate. So we try to integrate all of it, really. So we try to achieve carbon neutrality in Germany by 2045, while preserving economic prosperity and ideally getting economic benefits out of the transition as well. That's the idea of having everything under one roof. I'm now with the unit for economic analysis and scenarios. Before that, I was working on the German Bilateral Energy and Climate Cooperation. So I'm very glad that my two fellow panelists here are also close partners of Germany within our framework of bilateral energy cooperation, with very close partnership with Chile on hydrogen. When you saw the map of Chile in the very south, one of the pilot projects, the Haru Oni project, that's actually a very successful pilot project between Chile and Germany. Very, very proud of that. So that's a very specific outcome of our modeling and international work on hydrogen. And I wasn't really sure what you're more interested in the modeling work or the policy work or the international implications. So I tried to give you a small insight into all of that, hopefully within the time limit. So let's start with the modeling framework. So we try to follow the principle of evidence-based policymaking. So we try to get a rough idea of the numbers, how the system might develop within the next decades, how we can decarbonize the German energy system. And for that purpose, we have a large research project called the Langfrist-Szenarien in German, which is simply long-term scenarios. So it's a large modeling consortium in which we model different pathways of reaching the climate neutrality target, which for Germany is 2045. And with two lead scenarios, which are supposed to give orientation for all our policy actions. One is a scenario which is based on strong electrification. So everything is electrified that's feasible. There's no hydrogen use in transport. There's no hydrogen in heating. Hydrogen is limited to the sectors where you can't really use electricity from today's point of view. Technologies change, so that might change as well. But that's the focus there. And we have a different scenario, which is a bit more bullish and optimistic on hydrogen. So there we assume very low optimistic prices for green hydrogen in the long term, which lead to hydrogen use also in sectors where you could feasibly also use electricity. So there's a bit of hydrogen in transport and heating as well, more hydrogen uptake in industry. And so here you see basically the uncertainty getting bigger with time. So in the one scenario, you have much more hydrogen demand than in the other. We also look at other scenarios where we limit the build-up of the infrastructure that's necessary, what implications that might have. So all of these scenarios serve as robustness checks, so to speak. And we don't model that ourselves. We have a research consortium tasked with that, led by the Fraunhofer EC Institute in Karlsruhe, and there's several others involved. And we're very lucky to have them, since it turns out to be quite complicated and often messy to model all of these end-use sectors and the energy supply. And we do that for all of Europe because everything is interconnected within the European energy system. So we have separate models for all end-use sectors and for the energy supply. And I won't go through all of them here. I just want to give you like a snapshot of what kind of comes out of these modeling tools at the example of hydrogen. On the left here, you see the model scenarios for the German hydrogen demand in the industry sector. So that's the demand we're most certain about, because Germany still has a relatively large industrial base. So we have a steel industry and a large chemical industry where you have hard to abate applications for which electricity is not always feasible, such as steel making, the iron making, for which you now use coal, and we want to switch to the hydrogen route for that. So you see from now up to 2045, industry might have a hydrogen demand of around 300 terawatt hours. And in Germany, we have that habit of talking about hydrogen in terawatt hours, which no one else does, I think. So 100 terawatt hours is around 3 megatons. So that would be around 9 megatons of industrial hydrogen demand in the electricity scenario. That's mostly in the steel industry and in the chemical industry applications which you can't really electrify. And the hydrogen scenario is actually twice of that, so much higher hydrogen demand. And on top of industry, we have around 3 megatons of demand in our electricity sector to cover the phase in winter when there's no sun and no wind, and we need to produce electricity to get us through the winter. That's an additional like 3 megatons by 2045, we think. Then we model hydrogen production in Germany. Similar to Chile, Germany doesn't have any energy resources when it comes to oil and gas. Unlike Chile, we also have very limited renewable potential. Our aim is to have 10 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity by 2030 and around 70 gigawatts by 2045. Which is an optimistic scenario, but even when we reach it, it only allows us to cover around 30% of our hydrogen demand, even in the low demand scenario. So we're actually planning on importing, but still here you see the model tells us where to produce the hydrogen within in Germany. It's mostly in the north where we have all the wind, and also offshore wind is planned to be used for that. And then 2/3 of the hydrogen probably needs to be imported from other parts of the world. That's where Chile and Colombia come into the picture, for example, and many others. There, based on our modeling, we think that what we need as molecular hydrogen, so hydrogen as a gas, that's most likely to come from other European countries via pipelines, because that's the most feasible and cheapest way to produce it without any conversion losses. But then on top of the actual hydrogen demand, we also have a very large demand of hydrogen derivatives, such as ammonia, methanol, sustainable aviation fuels, shipping fuels, which will be another like 6 to 10 megaton, depending on the scenario. And that very likely will be imported from countries all around the world, such as Chile, Colombia, Namibia, Australia. Hence, now we go to policymaking. You see how the modeling and the scenario analysis then leads to policy making. Germany has a hydrogen strategy since 2019. Back then, everyone was still very optimistic about hydrogen. Like politicians loved it. Like they wanted to use it for everything, basically. I think now we're a bit more realistic. Hydrogen honeymoon is over. We see it's all very complicated and very expensive. And but that's saying that hydrogen is like the Swiss Army knife of the energy transition. You can use it for everything. But now people realize for most applications, there turns out to be a better tool, which is slightly cheaper than hydrogen. But even if we limit ourselves to the applications where hydrogen is really the best alternative, we still have that relatively large hydrogen demand. So this year, in order to cover the hydrogen import needs, we drafted a hydrogen import strategy based on the insight from the modeling that Germany has limited capacity for hydrogen production itself, but huge hydrogen demand in industry, so we need to import a lot. And now, voila, there's a hydrogen import strategy. On the left side, you see like the scenario outcomes, projections for hydrogen demand, which is projected to increase from around 50 terawatt hours in 2024. That's like current hydrogen demand in fertilizer production and refineries mainly, increased to 360 to 500 terawatt hours. That's like 12 to 15 megatons just for hydrogen itself in 2045, plus around 6 megatons for derivatives. And the hydrogen import strategy, we try to map out a strategy how to realize these imports in cooperation with partner countries around the world. So what are the transport options? What's the demand? What are the support schemes? We have support schemes such as H2 Global, like a double-sided auction scheme to facilitate pilot projects for green hydrogen. All of that came out of the hydrogen modeling, so to speak. The scenarios are also used as the basis for infrastructure planning in Germany, both for the electricity networks, but also for the gas networks. So we think that hydrogen as a gas will mostly be transported by a pipeline, both within Germany and within Europe. So as a result of that, on the very right-hand side, you see what's called the hydrogen core network in Germany that's now being planned. And the first pipelines are supposed to be built within the next 2 to 3 years, actually. So that hydrogen network is supposed to connect like the most important production regions and import hubs with the most important off-takers, so industrial hubs and locations for hydrogen power plants. That's being built now. That's put into law. That's quite recent. And it will cost around 25 billion euros. So it's quite a huge investment. So you see, we're not just talking about the hydrogen. We really think it's necessary for industry and the power sector mostly. Personally, I don't think that we will see any hydrogen in home heating or transport in Germany. That's rather unlikely. But even if you leave those sectors out, the hydrogen demand is there. And then for covering the hydrogen demand, we need imports both from other European countries, such as from Spain, from the UK, from Scandinavia, from the MENA region, from Algeria, Morocco, for example. So we're planning these pipeline projects together with partner countries. So Danish colleagues know what I'm talking about. There's one pipeline plant connecting Germany and Denmark for transporting the nice green Danish hydrogen to Germany, for example. So all of that comes out of the scenario modeling. And then we also plan on expanding port infrastructure for importing the derivatives, ammonia, methanol, and so on at the same time. Then the big question, which our models can't answer, unfortunately, is who will actually buy all the hydrogen, and will industry pay the premium for green hydrogen, or might it actually relocate production processes, and will industry shift their factories to different parts of the world where they don't face these tough climate regulations compared to Europe? So that's really the tough question. Will all of that lead to green industry or to an deindustrialized Germany? We hope the first will be the result, but we don't know. It's not so easy. In the steel industry, for example, we now have multi-billion euro subsidy programs to facilitate the transition to green steel making based on green hydrogen. But even with these very high subsidies, we see that steel makers are still reluctant to make the actual investments into the steel factory transformation. So it's not an easy task, but we're still optimistic. And my last slide, since this is an international forum and Germany is a small country, we need to rely on collaborations with all of you. So to realize that vision of a mostly electricity but partly hydrogen-based future, we have a network of around 30 energy and climate partnerships. And with most of these partner countries, we also collaborate on hydrogen quite intensively, and with more than 10 countries we have dedicated hydrogen partnerships. Chile was amongst the first, and it's a very productive and fruitful partnership, like the Haru Oni project that came out of it, where Siemens Energy and Porsche are involved in producing e-fuels and in the south of Chile and shipping them to Germany eventually. So that's really exciting to have these projects on the ground coming out of collaboration projects with Colombia as well, very fruitful collaboration. So yeah, that was the short introduction. I didn't look at the time, I have to admit. I hope it's still within the limit. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Florian, and thank you to all of our speakers. So we're going to move to a panel discussion now. As I mentioned, we will try to make some time for Q&A from those in the room and those online. And we also have the opportunity for some interventions from the country representatives if you'd like to share your views later. So please be thinking about what you'd like to contribute through the session. What I'd like to do is start with a fairly open, probably relatively challenging question. So you gave us a really good view on your national context and your current priorities and some of the questions you're asking yourselves. But what I'd like to do is zoom in a little. So could you each, we'll go in order of those who presented, please. Could you each tell us what the main challenge you see in thinking about how you integrate hydrogen into your planning and your analysis, and the main opportunity that you see, please? Starting with Francisco.
Yeah, thank you very much. Tough question. Main challenges. I think hydrogen is a very new industry. As you said before, the honeymoon is getting over. So I think it is a good thing, because when everything is so perfect, you underestimate challenges. But when your honeymoon is over, you start facing challenges, and I think that's a good way of improvement as a country. I think main challenges are going to be price, of course, the price of electrolyzers, the price of building something so big and so remote, because that part of Chile is very remote. It's very low towns, small towns that live on firewood, and they're very remote. So I think building a very large industry there is not going to be an easy path. So to make that, all those challenges and make it profitable is a very big challenge for us. That's for the moment. And I think, well, we have another option, because as we talked before, we have a lot of sun on the north. I don't want to be that left behind, because it is important for us. As we talked on Monday, we have a lot of curtailment there now because of transmission constraints. So someone could say, oh, okay, that's a very good spot to start, not so remote, and we can do that, and we can ship to Asia, for example, because it's nearest. And that could be a very good solution too, because the power grid, imagine a 3 gigawatt project on hydrogen. I don't know if our power grid is going to support that kind of power that go instantly on and then instantly off. The power grid is the construction of a big city, so 3 gigawatts from one instant to another can drop all the power grid on the country. So I think that's a big challenge too. How are you gonna do that project on the north? It's gonna be connected to the power grid. How technically you can do that to absorb and that shift of consumption? That's a big challenge too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, the honeymoon is over, definitely. So I'm going just to mention one challenge out of the many, and it's aligning the stakeholders so we can have some strategic visions for hydrogen in Colombia, because right now some are just targeting and reducing price as soon as possible to make it feasible, while some others are evaluating how to increase the local demand so they can make it feasible, while some others are concerned about the social and environmental aspects, which of course, if these are not included, then it's never going to be feasible. So I think aligning of this and having just one goal as a country is right now a challenge.
Okay, where do I start? There are so many challenges right now. So our models, our energy scenarios tell us there will be huge demand for hydrogen. Our challenge is these energy models, they don't buy the hydrogen. We need to find off-takers for the hydrogen in reality. And to find that offtake and get them from the stage where they declare they might want to use hydrogen eventually, and then signing unbinding MOUs, to the stage where they sign a real offtake contract over like 10 or 15 years, where they pay the price that's necessary to get the projects off the ground. That turns out to be the real challenge. So the economics of hydrogen, in particular at the early stage, where the price difference compared to fossil alternatives is still very, very large, larger than expected a couple of years ago. We either need to subsidize that gap as a government, which is really, really expensive. We can only do that for a limited share of the hydrogen for a very limited time. And then the question is, how sustainable will that be in the long run? Will, in that time, the price of hydrogen decrease sufficiently so that there will be a sustainable business model without any subsidies, or will it require infinitive subsidies to keep that hydrogen business running? And if that's the case, we probably shouldn't go down that way in the first place. So it all depends on the off-takers and what kind of decision they will make in the next years and what kind of products they really require. I don't know the answer, honestly. So now we're in the phase of the reality check. Who really wants the hydrogen and what do they pay?
Thank you all very much. So I have one more and then we'll move on to those from the audience. So I've been asked to remind you to put your name cards up if you'd like to speak. I see we've got a few. So the queue is forming. So we'll just have one more from me then before we move on. I was going to ask about how you're balancing hydrogen relative to the various derivative commodities in your models, but you all already introduced that. So that's covered, which is very helpful. Thank you. But what I would like to touch on is the balance between your domestic decarbonisation priorities and how you're considering the role for these commodities in those versus the emergence of a potential global market that you obviously want to be part of. And indeed, we heard Florian around the German perspective on what that means here. So could you describe how you see the balance between the domestic applications for these commodities in your own energy systems with the potential opportunities, challenges, risks in an international market? So another tricky question, I know, but it'd be great to hear from all three of you. Thank you.
Okay, another tricky question. I say I like to answer always depends. It always depends. I love that answer. I think in one way, I would say it goes on different pathways because there are different things. We are planning to build hydrogen industry as an export industry. So only mostly in the beginning, it's going to be an off-grid. We are planning always off-grid projects. But the stability of the system, as I told before, the far south, everything are going to focus on off-grid projects. So I think the decarbonization plan goes in another path. That's my first answer. But we also have on our own domestic projections for the consumption of our country. We are planning on rely on hydrogen use very aggressive too. I think for our decarbonization plan for 2015, we are planning to be net zero. And to achieve that goal, we are planning 26%. I think I had one slide about that. I think 26% relies on hydrogen reconversion. So I think it's a lot. I think it's risky because of the honeymoon and the starting industry and everything. I have my doubts, but that's our plan, and we have to write that future, as Charlie said earlier in the morning. We have to make that happen. So we rely a lot on hydrogen use, the conversion, and that's a very good challenge to achieve too.
Yeah, I think that the first thing is just being explicit about including specific uses in your model. In our models, in this case, we are also trying to see from an energy efficiency perspective, we should just electrify as much as we can and use hydrogen and derivatives in a very smart way as an input for steel industries or for other uses. So just quantifying that. Of course, that's a priority for us as an energy planning unit. The first point is just to supply your own country and then see if you can export. And when it comes to energy potential, Colombia has still huge renewable potential unexploited in areas. But then again, we don't want to, in that case, we are evaluating, we want to give the right signals because we don't want to also create additional conflicts that comes from the very communication of scenarios. So if now a local community sees a projection that says we are going to use, I don't know, 10 gigawatts for local consumption of hydrogen and 60 gigawatts to export, then the question comes is like, are we going to use our land for that? And then we don't want to create an additional conflict. So right now, trying to balance out is having the conversations, first of all, and I will respond this question again in a couple of years and we'll let you know how it goes.
So I already mentioned industry. So we think in Germany, industry will be the largest off-taker of hydrogen. And there we look in a very detailed way at all the industrial sectors and what kind of applications and processes they have, and where they can use electricity and where hydrogen is actually the more economical way, or actually the only way from a chemical perspective. And we see that like the electrification barrier is constantly moving. So applications where a couple of years ago we thought hydrogen is unavoidable now seem to be also feasible to electrify. So we observe that very closely. And then the second big issue in Germany right now is grid integration of hydrogen. So we're now at around 60% fluctuating renewables in the German electricity system. And we're planning to hit 80% by 2030. And then we want to be fully decarbonized a couple of years later. And the more solar and wind we have in the system, the more important gets to have electrolyzers to make use of that excess electricity at certain times of the day and the year. And then in other times of the year, we need that hydrogen for balancing out the electricity supply. So getting that right is also one of the top priorities right now, so that we actually achieve that target of being 100% carbon neutral in the electricity grid. So industry decarbonization, electricity system integration, decarbonization, these are the two main demand challenges for us right now, plus organizing the supply from all around the world, obviously, but that's more your priority, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, panelists. Very interesting perspectives, and it's good to have essentially both sides of that equation represented. I think that helps broaden the discussion. So we'll take questions and comments from the floor now. And first on the list is, I'll just say in advance, I'm sorry for mispronunciations. So Gustavo, please.
Thank you very much. Congratulations to all for the presentations, really good. And I do see that hydrogen is a big uncertainty at this point of any energy scenarios, because as you mentioned, we do have a lot of memorandum of understanding being announced. We do have some, but not so much FIDs being announced, and less projects actually being built. Yeah, so if we look in the short term, it's already an uncertainty in that sense, because we don't know the magnitude which this market will be able to reach, especially because of the question of the off-takers. Yes, that is that will guide this question. But my question is more related to the challenges to the electricity power system of these countries that are going to produce for export. And this is because this is a new type of demand in the electrical system that will demand a lot of investments in transmission. Francisco yesterday was mentioned that Chile is already facing some challenges. And in Brazil, we are also facing some challenges because of these projects that are being announced. They are kind of requesting access to the grid. And then you have to have more clear if this project will go forward, because I mean, it's a huge investment in transmission that will change a little bit the power grid as a general whole. So this is a challenge that I would like to know how the countries are facing that, because we are already facing that in Brazil also, and this is a little bit challenging. This new type of demand that are really concentrated at one point of the grid, it's kind of changing the pattern that we used to have on the power grid sector.
So essentially, how do you plan a radically different energy system, I guess? Would any of the panelists like to take that one?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I think I achieved that point before, briefly. I'm going to explore more on that. We have two types of projects. As I said, on the far south, there's no power grid. So we are planning those projects to be individual off-grid projects. But the question remains, well, when one project is installed and another project goes right beside it and another, are they going to have their own power grid or not? That's a good question, and we're talking about that right now. So we have not an answer for that, but that's a good place to start. On the other hand, on the projects on the north, as I said before, they can connect to the power grid. That's a possibility. But when you have a project of 3 gigawatts that installs to your system and goes on and off all the time, how many investment you have to do to your power grid to achieve that kind of demand, 1 second to another, and go on and go off. Mostly we're working now, we're studying some kind of project that says that's very tricky. The project says, I'll have my own generation, but only in case of emergency, I could maybe consume energy from your grid. Can you achieve that 3 maybe gigawatts from 1 second to another? And you have to say, oh, I can, I can't, when, how much, who's going to pay for that? And that's the trickiest question. Who's going to pay for that? Because 3 gigawatts of power lines for maybe use, well, who, how? I think that's a very challenge.
Very quick so we can move to the questions. Yeah, in Colombia, we have around 30 projects already like with an intention of developing. So now we are evaluating actually with GIC, looking for studies about technical constraints of the grid to receive all those projects and to see what additional investments has to be made in the grid to be able to support them. Right now, what we see is more and more challenges. Right now, what we see is that we need to act really fast to have all the grids on time, so these projects can have at least access to the electricity, and also having discussions about what it means for the cost of transmission grids and who are going to pay for them, because the developers, they don't want to pay for the transmission costs, right? So we need to expand the grid, but at the end, it's not very clear who is going to pay for that expansion of the grids. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Thank you for the question and the responses. I think definitely a common challenge that many of us can see, and perhaps we'll maybe have some answers at future session. So we're going to take a number of questions together and then put our panelists on the spot and try to make some answers appear. So first question, please, from Farhan.
Thank you, panelists, for sharing the detailed hydrogen plan. Especially you run on the different models and aggregated demand, which industry is going to be off-taker of the hydrogen. My simple question is that, have you run any scenario projecting the hydrogen price in coming years, considering the different skyrocketing in hydrogen supply and demand? And what will be the importing countries, either the trading markets for this hydrogen?
Thank you. So next question, please, from Rohit Sen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your insights. It's really wonderful, and I agree that green hydrogen does play a crucial role for net zero and a renewables future. My question here is, in listening to you all, I'm trying to understand which country would play a net importer and a net exporter, and those things will of course change as maybe Chile and Colombia and other countries change their own home demand. What would Germany do in that case? As you said, Florian, that 2/3 of your demand would be, taken from other countries. Any reflection on the energy security of supply? You also said that the off-takers are yet to be decided, industry and so on. So to that, I wanted to ask, and this is again to all the panelists, how do you see others playing a role in this? Is it only going to be limited to national governments, or do you see subnational governments, civil societies, etc., also playing a role? And what exactly do you see? And the last part to it is a bit on the geopolitics going around and the unpredictabilities around with various countries. I saw that map that Florian you showed. Some of them would be the net importers and exporters. How do you see sort of an OPEC would come out for this hydrogen commodity? What happens if then 5 years down the line there are sanctions being put on certain countries, like for example Iran and Venezuela has for oil producing, no? One of the biggest, but you can't buy from them. So how do you take these considerations into your scenarios and modeling? Thank you.
Thank you, likewise. So we'll take a few more and then try to summarize. Next one's Wisdom, please.
My question goes to all the three panelists. One important thing information decision makers want to know is what is the levelized cost of energy for generating power from hydrogen. And I'd ask at now, what else levelized cost of energy did you factor in the modeling? And then the second question is there any country at the moment that is utilizing or generating electricity from hydrogen, green hydrogen, and injecting into the transmission line? I'm just wondering how feasible it will be to use electricity to produce hydrogen in order to give back to electricity, especially for countries, developing countries that have very, very low energy access. If I can be convinced about the energy balance in that sense. Thank you. Asante.
Thank you very much. Next question from Reshma Francie, please.
Thank you. I'm bringing back the conversation around energy equity. I think it was from the Colombian presentation, which highlighted that. And the other element of energy equity that we've heard of is about access to clean energy. So in the German context, when you have this huge demand for hydrogen, how do you create constraints within your modeling or integrate with the residential sector or the, let's say, transport sector, which is also growing with electricity demand? Who gets it first, clean energy? Is it hydrogen production or is it the residential uses? And how is that constraint modeled in or integrated with other models? And coming into the Colombian and the Chilean presentations, what made those pilots click, right? So how were those contracts created to show socioeconomic benefits? Were some of those metrics already recorded? Do you give importance or do you look at the jobs created or increase of in-country value? What helped bring those stakeholders together? What numbers or metrics brought those stakeholders together to say, yes, we're going to go ahead for the pilots? Thank you. And thank you for the presentations.
Thank you. One more from Asami, please.
Thanks for the presentation. My question is actually inspired by Francisco. You said that in Chile you have done many plans, and we see this all the time that there's sometimes lots of plans, but I guess in the case of Chile, they are all somehow coordinated under a proper framework, but it's not always the case. My question is, because at IRENA, we are also sometimes asked by country to help them with creation of the hydrogen strategy. But there's also a risk of this kind of strategy being isolated with the rest of the strategy or rest of the master plans or rest of other things. So what's the advice that you can give to other countries to make sure that there is always that the process is coordinated?
Thank you, Sami. Very relevant in this context. So we have one more online, and then we'll try and synthesize and get some answers. So we have Sohee Song online, hopefully.
There is one online.
Oh, well, in the meantime, Sohee Song, please. Okay, so it's in the chat. Right, okay, so I'll read it actually. Okay, sorry for that. So this is a question for Florian. In your two different scenarios, how was the economics of hydrogen considered, such as transport and storage? Also, I might have missed this, but in the chemical industry, under the electrification scenario, is hydrogen still more competitive than electrification? Building sector modeling, does hydrogen have a meaningful role in final consumption, especially in comparison to electricity? So I would summarize that as being around various end uses and how these are modeled. And then we have one more in the room. I've lost the name, sorry, I can't read from here, but you can see. Thank you.
Yeah, it's Hamadia from Pakistan. So yeah, my question is pretty much similar to the Rohit about the energy security. As a wonderful presentation has been presented by the German delegation. And I'm pretty much want to know about what kind of scenarios did the German ministry has run for the energy security context, like sensitivity analysis and as hydrogen is pretty much vibrant and like what kind of sensitivity analysis and assessments and scenarios has been worked by the German Ministry for Energy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you likewise. So I'll try and group those to make it slightly more manageable for our panelists. So I think we have two that are around costs and prices and how these are modelled, and some of the assumptions that analysts and their colleagues might have made in their modelling on levelized costs. We have a number of questions around geopolitics and how different countries should play a role together in an emerging international market. How should security supply risks be addressed? What do the panelists think about how their own national context play a role in that dynamic? Sami also very helpfully pointed out that all these strategies need to be brought together and coordinated, and we need to see how these individual national priorities translate into international collaboration and cooperation. So it'd be good to reflect on those. And then there's also the perspective in there on equity and access and fairness. And I think Jessica's presentation also mentioned community engagement and benefits, and I think that was a theme that came out in the others. So I was trying to summarize. I think I've actually just repeated them all. It's quite a complex mix, but basically if we could move to closing remarks from each panelist and try to address some of these themes as feels most appropriate to your national context, that'd be really helpful, please. Thank you. And thank you very much for all the questions. So Francisco first, please.
Yeah, so I took some notes on the questions, so I'll try to go one by one. Paham asked about the modulation of the demand. We'll some projections, mainly international projections, some McKinsey or international agency or our domestic H2 plan too. So we usually project the demand. Usually through scenarios, pessimistic, normal, and optimistic, and that's a usual standard. We model the demand is going to be on-grid, off-grid. We start, as I said before, off-grid because of the amount of projects. But as the power grid grows and it goes greener, it's common sense that it will be on-grid project. So we take all that in account for the projection. Rohit asked a very good question about energy security. We are currently working, for example, with our Navy. That's a very interesting project because our Navy is working, of course, the security, and all those boats and ships and everything moves on diesel, and we know we don't produce diesel. So they say, okay, if we have an energy shortage for reasons, how are we going to move? And that's a very good question. And they say, okay, we are starting to think how we can retrofit our ships to hydrogen. Not for the price. We all agree that hydrogen nowadays is expensive, more expensive than electricity or fossil fuels. But they're willing to pay for that because of security reasons. So that's a very important thing to take into account. They move the industry, hoping for that in the future prices drop and is more affordable for everyone else. So, and Rohit also asked about the government involvement. We as a government, as I said before, all the enterprises, all the markets are private. It's all a private market. So as a government, we try to make the path, but it's the industry, it's the enterprise that go or don't go for the path you grow. And that's a very interesting way for the question. Winston asked about the levelized cost. We already are talking about the levelized cost. We aim for $1, I think. $1. I'm not an expert on that. And $1 the ton, I think. But we are thinking that it may be too optimistic. So 1 point something. Yeah, you're laughing. You're laughing. Yeah, we are working on that number. And working projects of hydrogen. As I said before, we have some pilot projects. Maybe Walmart, the Walmart warehouse is very common. A lot of small projects, they're pilot. Model integration, I just talk about model integration. Who's going first? Rush Mask, who goes first? Well, as I said before on the Navy example, those who are willing to pay more, those are the goals, because it's not affordable as we want to. Those who want, so the question should be, who's gonna afford that? Who wants to be green? Who wants to have a green image? And in Chile's example, one of our main industry is copper mining. So copper mining wants to be green for selling that copper to the world. So we are aiming to that kind of big industries that are willing to pay. So they lower the cost on the future. Asami, that good question. How do you coordinate your plans? That's very important. We talk about on Monday, I think. We have a lot of coordination between ministries. We have tasks defined by law and coordination by law too. So we have to coordinate every time. That's very important thing to do. We have to make our plans together. And every ministry can have their own plan, but someday along the road, you have to coordinate. That's a must for climate change plans. You cannot do as a transport ministry your own climate change, because climate change falls to everything. So you can do your own party with your own music and your own drinks. So coordination is very important, and social participation, stakeholder participation, that's very important for a plan to work out on the long term. Hamad talk about energy security. I think I talked about that. And sensitivity analysis. Well, as I told before, we usually use 3 scenarios to make a lot of which paths could be possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very impressive delivery there, running through them all. Thank you. Jessica, please.
All right. So, yeah, I think the perspectives for Colombia is that it's going to be one net exporter of hydrogen, but recent discussion is that it's going to be really hard to make these projects feasible for export if we don't have local demand to kick off, right? So these first off-takers are also something that we are having the conversations with industry, etc. But then again, right now there's no one who's willing to pay what it actually costs. We don't have the situation of who would get first the electricity of people, etc., because we don't import electricity, and we don't expect to import electricity, or at least our plan is also be a net export of electricity to our neighbors at some point. And about metrics, we're working on it, so it would be really nice to actually talk to you and see some recommendations. But something that is clear is that we need to have also the conversation around water uses, and specifically bring this to the context of each region. So if the hydrogen projects are going to consume more water than the local communities around it, then you can make sure that there's going to be a conflict that is going to delay or even just completely constrain the project. The use of areas for the renewables, and how much electricity is going to demand compared to the local communities. How is the price that the hydrogen is going to pay compared to the price that the local communities are paying for electricity? In which case, then again, if you develop a project that is not going to pay for the transmission costs, then probably local communities around are going to pay for that transmission cost. So that's something that needs to keep into balance. And we don't have yet the analysis, but we want to is to measure if it's going to have any impact on electricity prices per se. By increasing electricity demand, then of course it will change the game in the market. And I think that's it. Yeah, I know. And about how or we guarantees a coordinated process. We are integrating and evaluating these roadmaps, trying to make it just one policy of just energy transition that has all these aspects inside, and not just individual roadmaps for any kind of energy product. Yeah.
Okay, so many relevant and interesting questions. I'm not sure if I can cover all of those, but I made some notes. So first of all, on the aspect of energy security, who will actually import and export? Might there be an OPEC for hydrogen? A very relevant idea, actually. When we look at who will import, I think it's a much smaller number than who might export hydrogen. So we see relevant import ambitions from Germany, Japan, South Korea, Netherlands, Belgium. So only a handful of countries, really. When you compare that to potential producers and exporters of hydrogen, that's a much larger number. You could produce hydrogen anywhere where you have sun and wind at different prices, obviously. But the potential supply for hydrogen is much more diverse compared to what we now have as a market for fossil commodities. When you look at the market for oil or gas, it's much more concentrated. OPEC, you mentioned it. And at the example of Germany, that can be illustrated quite nicely. We came out of the situation where around half of our gas supply came via pipeline from Russia. And we learned it the hard way that this is not the best strategy for energy security. And when it comes to oil, it's very similar. It's a much more limited number of suppliers. So we think that in a hydrogen world, where even when Germany relies on hydrogen imports, actually that will increase energy security compared to the current status. And we try to diversify the supply from the beginning. Hence, we collaborate not only with one or two countries, but with many. And in our ideal future, there's like a broad, diversified liquid market for hydrogen and derivatives globally, where we don't have that situation again, where we have an over-reliance on just one trade partner for our energy imports. And if there might emerge an OPEC for hydrogen, well, that would mean we have a market for hydrogen. So that would be a good sign in a way. So at the moment, everyone is happy to cover their costs, and then asking for monopolistic price. That's even more challenging, isn't it? Like having someone pay that markup. If we come to that situation, that would be kind of a success, I think. But it's not my main worry right now. Also due to the competition, which is much stronger compared to oil and gas. The modeling. I can't go into all the details of the models. I just want to mention that there's a website where you can look into the model documentation, into the results. You can play around with the scenarios. It's very interactive, actually. There's also an English version available. The website is in the slides. I'm not sure if the slides will be shared. It's langfristszenarien.de, so long-term scenarios in German, and there you can find so much information on that. Just a very brief intro on how that's modeled. So it's a least cost optimization model. So the model tries to find the pathway which can realize the decarbonization target at the lowest cost. So because hydrogen is relatively expensive compared to electrification, it's allocated to the sectors where you don't have feasible alternatives and where the willingness to pay is highest, so to speak. Hence, we don't see any hydrogen demand in the buildings or transport sector. In our electrification scenario, we only see a little bit of hydrogen in transport and the building sector in the scenario where we reduce the cost of hydrogen to a very low price, actually. The most part of hydrogen comes from Europe in those models, and there's like a European-wide cost optimization. So we don't have a hydrogen price, so to speak, in these models. It's more a shadow price, which comes out of the the modeling, taking into account the whole energy system. I'm coming to your question, what's the cost of hydrogen? Right now, the cost of hydrogen is really high. I mentioned the H2 Global scheme where we have the double auctions. So there's like an independent institute which has been set up, and they now have these auctions where they buy hydrogen derivatives on the global market to then sell it to off-takers in Europe in a couple of years. And the first tender has just been completed. And the contract goes to a project in Egypt, and they sell green ammonia to H2 Global at a price of $1,000 per ton of ammonia, which translates into around $4.50 per kilogram of hydrogen. So that was the cheapest project in these auctions. That's quite expensive. So in a context where you still need to realize energy access for large parts of the population, obviously it doesn't make sense to produce hydrogen for realizing energy access. The electricity is a much cheaper and more economical way. And you also mentioned using hydrogen for producing electricity. That's twice as expensive because you first produce hydrogen and then you produce electricity. In Germany, we need to do that due to the German context. When you look out of the windows here, now it's still sunny, but in the winter, yeah, there's not so much sun, and then partly there's no wind. So we need to cover long periods of time without any renewables. I imagine in many countries, you don't have that problem in the first place. When you have more reliable solar or wind supply throughout the year, you can balance these short-term fluctuations with battery storage much cheaper than with hydrogen. So I would look into that option first and only go for hydrogen storage when there's no alternative left because it's super expensive. I hope I didn't forget any questions, but you can always catch me over lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's very comprehensive once again. So it's been a real pleasure moderating this panel. The panelists have been extremely cooperative and extremely proactive in answering the various questions put forward. So thank you all very much. Thank you all very much for your engagement and your questions. It's very much appreciated. It's a more dynamic environment than I was expecting. So it's really good to see and very much appreciated. So I have just a couple of observations to make about what I think we've all heard. And then we'll move into the closing of the forum itself. So the first thing that I think all three panelists said one way or another, and that you're hearing here first, the honeymoon is over. So I thought that was quite a useful articulation that you all made. Thank you. It's great that we're aligned. That suggests we are perhaps moving into being a bit more cynical or a bit more negative about the opportunities here in the hydrogen and derivative sectors than we might have been previously. But what I think that actually reflects is more of a realistic approach to thinking about how we use these sectors to support the transition. And we heard a lot of good examples of some really considered modelling analysis and policy making as a result, leading in particular to thinking about hydrogen as a potential means of integrating otherwise curtailed renewable electricity. That's a great opportunity for those countries with great renewable resources. And we also heard a very good amount of alignment between the speakers on the potential end-use sectors and applications that we think are most appropriate for these sectors or these commodities across the hard-to-abate sectors. So I'm glad to hear that we're aligning and moving forward together on those. We did hear, though, about some challenges that perhaps give us some focus areas for further work and further collaboration. So we heard, and I like this, we heard that energy models do not buy hydrogen. And I think that was another really good observation. So thank you, Florian. It's a good point. And a number of the questions and indeed the comments from the speakers reflected the fact that we have challenges around the costs here. So hydrogen is not going to be cheap, neither are the derivative commodities. And we need to really focus on how we bring those costs down. I think one of the opportunities there is how we prioritise the end uses. So we've covered that one, but let's continue working together on the innovation and the analysis that can help to rationalise there. There's another question around who pays for the infrastructure. So this was another one that came up in the questions and the observations from the speakers. We'll need a lot of both power and potentially gas, and then also port and derivative shipping infrastructure, and we need to get a handle on how on earth that's going to be financed. So a good challenge for us all to be thinking about and modelling and considering. Then I'm going to close with one more quote from the panel. So Francisco said that to carry out, I'm paraphrasing, but if you develop a strategy in isolation in your country and you don't compare, or in your ministry, and you don't work with your partners outside and other countries, it's like holding your own party with your own drinks. And I think that's a really good way of articulating the risk or the challenge that we are thankfully all here to avoid. So it's great that you've not been holding your own parties. You've come together this week and you've discussed these challenges and these opportunities, and in this sector with all this novelty and all these extra challenges, I think that's extra important. So thank you very much once again to the panel. I'd like to suggest a round of applause. Thank you all for your participation, and yeah, thanks. Over to colleagues.